Okay, let's unpack this. If you are anything like us, you have stood paralyzed in front of the supermarket oil aisle. It is just this dizzying, overwhelming wall of choices. You've got corn, canola, soy, sunflower, olive.
Oh, and light blended extra virgin.
Exactly. And we're led to believe we live in this, age of maximum culinary freedom.
But the sources we've been digging into for this deep dive suggest something else entirely. We're looking at centuries of culinary history, court records from the Ottoman Surrey to medieval England, and they all suggest that this sheer volume,
Oh, yeah.
well, it's fundamentally misleading.
So our mission today is really to cut through all of that clutter.
Yes, we are going to separate the ancient, genuine kitchen staples, the oils that have been used safely for thousands of years, from the modern, industry-driven commodities that, just flooded the market relatively recently.
And the core premise that holds this whole deep dive together, and this is probably the most critical takeaway from the research, is this. The historical definition of vegetable oil is just. It's vastly different from what we use today. The key message you should remember is that not every botanical vegetable oil is actually edible. We have to stop looking at the shelf price and start looking at the history.
Exactly. We need to synthesize the clear facts from these historical texts to understand what major civilizations actually put on their plates, or, as we'll see, what they put in their lamps and their medicines.
So where do we start?
Let's start by defining the genuine edible oils, the ones I like to call the antiques, which were used for millennia.
So we're narrowing the field down drastically.
Way down.
Botanically, you're talking about well over 50 types of vegetable oil in the world. But when we look at genuine, historical, consistent culinary use, the oils that appear again and again in major kitchens, our sources bring that number down to only about, 15 or 20 varieties?
That's right. The modern market is, in effect, it's flooded with products that were historically exceptions, not traditions.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to how they were made, what's the one thing that links all those traditional oils?
It's their method of extraction. They were generally cold-pressed, minimally processed, and pretty limited in production. These oils were valuable precisely because getting the oil out was difficult, and it gave you a really low yield.
Can we just elaborate on that for a second? Because we hear that term, cold-pressed, thrown around all the time.
All the time.
So why did ancient civilizations actually insist on it? I mean, what do you really lose when you use heat or chemicals to speed things up?
What's fascinating here is that the sources imply they understood chemical stability even without modern chemistry. Cold pressing is just crushing the seeds or fruit and extracting the oil without a lot of heat or chemical solvents.
Okay.
And that method preserves all the natural antioxidants, the vitamins, the flavor. The moment you introduce high heat, or the chemical processes we'll talk about later, you get a much bigger yield, sure, but you also degrade the nutritional quality, you destroy flavor, and you often create these unstable compounds that go rancid much faster.
So traditional oils were all about quality over quantity.
Precisely. They were making a defined, high-quality ingredient, not some neutral commodity.
So what are the cornerstone antiques? The big ones?
Well, unsurprisingly, olive oil is the absolute staple of the Mediterranean. It was central to ancient Greece, to Rome, and the Ottoman Empire. And it was multifunctional. You could use it hot for cooking, cold for finishing, and even as fuel for lamps.
Right, and then as you shift geographically, the story changes completely. If we move east, we find sesame oil.
Yes, essential across Mesopotamia, China, and India. And the sources highlight that it was highly valued in Eastern Palace kitchens, the Seri kitchens, specifically for its high heat resistance.
So it was more stable for frying.
Much more stable for frying and high-temperature cooking than a lot of other fats they had available.
The historical record also tracks these more luxury items, right? Geographically specific oils, like walnut oil.
Right. Walnut oil is strongly associated with medieval European courts, especially in France.
And wait, you mentioned that walnut oil was explicitly a luxury oil and they only used it cold. Why was that? Was it just cost? Or was it stability?
It was both, but primarily stability. Walnut oil has these really delicate fats that break down under heat and they turn bitter. So they weren't using it to, sear a steak.
Yeah.
They were drizzling it over salads or cold dishes to get that distinctive, rich flavor. It was a finishing oil, and its high cost meant it was really reserved for the elite.
It's like they understood the molecular structure without knowing the words for it. They were incredibly selective. And we also see almond oil being used in Ottoman and European courts, mostly for sweets, right? Like marzipans and medicines.
Exactly. And poppy seed oil, which you find in Anatolia and Central Europe, was another niche staple, especially in baking and pastries. It just reinforces that historical cooking was all about specificity.
They knew the right tool for the job.
Precisely. Now, before we jump to the Industrial Revolution, we should probably touch on a couple of oils that are common today, but only became widespread culinary staples much, much later.
Right, the ones you call the naturalized moderns.
Yeah. The sources cite rapeseed, which you might know as canola or colza oil.
That only became a major culinary player in the 20th century, mostly in places like the UK and Northern Europe. And even then, it was valued for the same reason as sesame oil, right? Its high heat resistance.
Exactly. And then you have unrefined sunflower oil, which became a home kitchen staple around the late 19th century, especially in Eastern Europe. But even in these cases, the traditional method involved minimal processing compared to what came next. So there's a real divide.
Okay, so now that we understand what was traditional, let's get into this fascinating counterpoint. This is the part that I think really defies our modern vegetable oil saturated world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
The court records show something really surprising. In many major historical kitchens, animal fats were often more common, more of a daily staple than vegetable oils.
That is the pivotal insight from the sources. Vegetable oil had this prestige because it was hard to produce or expensive to import. Animal fat was usually local, it was abundant, and it was incredibly calorie-dense. That made it the practical choice for fueling a massive palace kitchen.
Let's break that down for a few major courts. The Ottoman Saray, for instance, they used olive, sesame, and almond oils for specific things, right? High-status dishes or sweets.
Right, but the sources are crystal clear that the bulk of daily cooking relied on animal fats, specifically clarified butter or sedyay, and sheeptail fat, known as kuruk yawen.
So why sheeptail fat? I mean, they had olive trees all over the Ottoman territories.
It comes down to local economics and preservation. Tail fat and tallow have excellent stability, and they add a fantastic flavor to slow-cooked meats and stews, which were a huge part of the Saray diet. Vegetable oil was special, animal fat was the daily fuel.
And the English Saray shows the exact same logic.
Totally. Vegetable oil was incredibly limited. Olive oil was a highly taxed import, a pure luxury. Their entire culinary tradition was built on butter and tallow, or beef fat.
Rapeseed oil was just nowhere. Not until the 20th century, their geography dictated their fat choices. Dairy was everywhere, olives were not.
And the French Saray shows that geographical split perfectly.
Yeah.
In the South, you see olive oil because they're connected to Mediterranean trade. But the North was resolutely butter country. And even there, the prestige of walnut oil just shows that certain vegetable oils were reserved for very specific, high-status cold uses.
It really sounds like the selection of fat was never arbitrary. It was this careful decision driven by geography, trade, cost, and the specific chemical needs of the dish. There was no single universal oil.
They had a fat hierarchy.
Right.
Which makes the generic all-purpose oil we use today feel like a huge oversimplification. And it reinforces the ancient understanding. Ancient Rome and Greece were maybe the exception, where olive oil was truly central to everything: food, light, medicine.
They saw oil as a utility, like water.
Exactly. And that multifunctional appreciation is key.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And this is where we have to transition to the clear warning that we found in the sources. We're shifting now from these specific, cold-pressed, geographically linked fats to a category that the sources call out explicitly. Oils that did not exist historically for food, but emerged in the modern industrial age.
This is the critical distinction. These products entered the food chain, not because some chef discovered a brilliant new ingredient, but because industry needed a new market for its massive outputs. The sources are so clear about this. These oils were produced for industry, not for the kitchen.
That's a powerful point. Their edibility was just a profitable refinement process. They applied to what was essentially an industrial byproduct.
Exactly.
So let's look at the specific examples of the research flags. What about cottonseed oil? It's everywhere today in commercial cooking.
The sources state that this was originally used as machine lubricating oil.
Machine oil.
Machine oil, and sometimes as a base for low-grade soaps, long before it was chemically processed and rendered edible.
Wow. Okay, what about refined palm oil?
A very similar story. Historically, its primary use was for soap and candles, industrial processes. While people have eaten palm fruit for centuries, its industrial use as a mass-market cooking oil is very new and requires just a substantial amount of refinement. Excessive, really.
And then you have the massive subsidized crops.
Right.
Soy.
Right. Industrial soy oil originated primarily as a byproduct of the huge soybean industry, which was mostly focused on animal feed and industrial resins. And it's flagged specifically for being heavily refined and very high in omega-6 fatty acids.
And corn oil's in the same boat, right? Not a historical cooking oil by any stretch.
Not at all. It's a pure industrial product, a byproduct of the corn industry, extracted with chemical solvents and high heat. It was designed for scale and for neutrality.
Okay, so that process you mentioned, the excessive refinement, that seems to be the crux of the issue. This is where historical wisdom really clashes with modern tech. Can you walk us through what that actually involves?
Sure. So when you extract oil from these seeds using high heat and chemical solvents like hexane, you get a really high yield. But the oil itself is unstable. It's full of impurities and it tastes awful.
Right.
So the industrial process then requires 4 major steps to make it shelf stable and clear. First is degumming, to remove residues. Then neutralization, to remove free fatty acids. Then bleaching, which uses clay filters to remove color. And finally, intense deodorization.
Deodorization.
Yes, using steam under a high vacuum to literally strip out all the unpleasant odors that were created by the other processes.
So the oil you buy in the store that's perfectly clear and has no taste, it's that way not because it's naturally pure, but because it has been chemically and physically stripped of everything it once was.
Exactly. The goal is neutrality and longevity, not flavor or integrity.
And that really underscores the economic driver today, doesn't it? Why do these oils dominate the market?
The reasons are purely pragmatic. It's all about scale and cost. They are incredibly cheap to produce, they have long shelf lives, they're taste neutral, and they are perfectly suited for the demands of mass-produced food.
It's a classic conflict, historical quality versus modern cost efficiency. The source material captures this so perfectly with a powerful quote, which translates to, "Cheap things are not always traditional." They noticed hundreds of years ago that when a staple suddenly became cheap and abundant, it often meant a compromise in quality or origin.
It's a critical insight for us today. The cheapness of industrial oil isn't a sign of some great agricultural bounty. It's a sign of efficient chemical engineering and a supply chain built on subsidized crops.
So what does all this historical wisdom mean for someone standing in their kitchen today? If we look back at the historical record, 3 major actionable lessons seem to emerge about how civilizations used fats.
The first lesson is, historically, they just used less oil overall. Oil was expensive, it was difficult to produce, and they saw it as a powerful, defining ingredient, not something you just pour into a pan without thinking.
My grandmother would have been horrified at how much oil we use.
Your great-grandmother would have been too.
Lesson 2. They did not use a single oil for everything. They understood specificity. You don't use a delicate, cold-pressed walnut oil for deep frying.
You select a fat like tallow or a high-heat sesame oil that has the structural integrity to handle that kind of process.
And lesson 3. They selected oil strictly according to its purpose. They knew precisely which oils were safe for cold applications and which could handle high heat without breaking down or creating bitter flavors. This was a form of culinary preservation and health safety all in one.
And the modern era, the mistake we inherited from the industrial age, is this attempt to find one single, universal, neutral, and cheap oil that can do everything.
From salad dressing to deep frying.
Exactly. History teaches us that oils have distinct roles based on their structure, their origin, and their processing.
So to bring all this complexity down to one final piece of wisdom you can take with you, the source material offers this profound summary. It goes, vegetable oil is plentiful, edible oil is scarce. Oil is used not because it is abundant, but because it is right.
I love that, because it is right. That level of historical discernment is what we need to reclaim if we want to move beyond this industrial mindset that treats all clear liquid fat as basically interchangeable.
This deep dive really confirms that understanding fats is a study of civilization itself. It's dictated by climate, trade, and ultimately by industrial engineering.
That shift from specific, high-quality, geographically linked fats to cheap, mass-produced commodities is one of the most subtle yet profound markers of modern life.
And as we discussed, in the ancient world, oils had these multifaceted roles. They were essential for food, for light, for medicine. They were integrated utilities.
The true value comes from understanding its context and purpose, not just its availability. When history's greatest kitchens chose a fat, they knew why they chose it.
So given that historical selection was so purposeful, using different fats to lubricate machinery, light a lamp, treat a wound, or dress a salad, the final provocative thought for you to consider is this. When we strip away all those ancient, multifaceted roles and treat oil purely as a generic cooking ingredient, Optimized only for price and neutrality, what hidden benefits, connections, or even structural risk might we be fundamentally overlooking by choosing abundance over correctness? That's something worth mulling over the next time you shop.